Now let's tell you about another attack, one that took place in Central Europe, in Poland. Not a missile or a bomb strike. This was an attack on the authority of the Polish president. His name is Andrzej Duda and his position is at risk. A power struggle is on between President Duda and Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Yesterday, the latest salvo was fired. The Warsaw police raided the presidential palace. They went in to capture two fugitives. Fugitives who also happened to be members of parliament. The police went to arrest them, two MPs. They're opposition MPs. Their party lost the last election, so now they're in the opposition, and they now have a target on their backs. Polish courts have found them guilty of abuse of power, and it looks like the new government, the government of Prime Minister Donald Tusk, is hunting them down, even going into the hallowed halls of the presidential palace. Apparently, everyone knew that the two MPs were inside, under President Duda's protection. His office had even posted pictures with the men. And this was supposed to be a signal to the government for the police to back off. But they did not. Instead, they raided the presidential palace. They entered when Duda stepped out, and that's not all. The real insult to Duda is that he'd already pardoned these two MPs. All the way back in 2015, that's when he first became president. He pardoned these MPs, and he gave them refuge in the presidential palace, and yet they've been arrested. As you can imagine, Duda is not happy.
I am deeply shaken by this situation. The fact that former ministers Mariusz Kamiński and Maciej Wasik were put in prison despite presidential pardon, and that it was done in such zeal and such brutality.
Duda says he will not rest until the MPs are free. He has called for calm. He says any protests must be peaceful, but the opposition party supporters are angry.
They enter the presidential palace and arrest people. The presidential palace is akin to an embassy. People seek refuge from repression. Yet someone questions the presidential pardon. Who is above the president? This government, right now, seems to operate outside the bounds of the law. I don't want to offend anyone, but I feel like I'm living in a banana republic.
He asked, who is above the president? Well, that's a tricky question, especially in Poland. You see, the president's pardon was not randomly ignored by the new government. It was actually struck down by Poland's Supreme Court. It was also the court that ordered the arrest of these two MPs. So the question becomes, is the president above the courts? Now, here's what the court said, that the two men were pardoned too early. They did not go through all the appeal processes. A presidential pardon should be a tool of last resort, not something to use the minute a friend or ally gets into trouble. So that's why Poland's Supreme Court invalidated Duda's pardon, and the two MPs were sentenced to prison again. But the Polish president and the opposition do not accept this. Neither do some of the other courts. Courts packed with former government loyalists. They believe it is a ploy by the new Tusk regime. Another political and ideological battle. You see, Poland's previous government was right-wing nationalist. They frequently clashed with the European Union over Poland's internal law and order issues that violated EU policies. They were at loggerheads. But the new Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, is pro-EU. He was even the president of the European Council a few years ago. So he's the complete opposite of his predecessor. And what about the president? President Duda was appointed by the previous government. There's a divide between him and the Prime Minister, which is why Tusk is accused of undermining the president's authority. But Tusk remains defiant. He has chosen to double down and question Duda's role.
The crown would not fall from his head even if he were to acknowledge there is a legal dispute. This dispute arises from the belief that the first pardon was ineffective and therefore it should be reopened. No one would be bothering him about it, and he could put an end to this unnecessary show.
The retort directed at Duda will not be taken well. It will likely exacerbate the situation. And these two still have to spend months working together because Poland's next presidential election is scheduled for May 2025. Until then, we'll probably see more bickering like this. Poland's dual power centers will keep clashing, and the people will most likely suffer due to poor governance.